Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Virtual Breakfast. My name is Christine Charles. I am a field crops and regenerative ag extension educator based out of Southwest Michigan, and I'll be your host this morning. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Erin Burns, who will be presenting on post-application weed control, post-emergence weed control options. Erin, you could take it away.
All right, so this morning we're going to talk about post-emergence weed control, which might seem a bit early, since many of us are still planting and thinking about kind of that phase in our weed control this year. So I wanted to start briefly about what I've been thinking about these past few days, as we were out Tuesday applying many of our pre-emergence herbicide treatments, and we were freezing. It was really cold. And it's been quite wet. So I thought it'd be good for the group to be reminded about what might happen on the crop injury side and weed control wise when we're applying some of these pre-emergence herbicides under cool, wet conditions. And ultimately, cool, wet weather can slow the rate that our crops emerge. So those seeds stay in the soil a bit longer than under some of our more optimal conditions. And ultimately, what this does is just extends the amount of time that that seed is in contact with the herbicide that's in that soil water solution. And crop injury occurs, our crops are selectively tolerant to many of these herbicides that we're applying because they can metabolize the herbicide to non-toxic compounds. So that metabolism needs to be going at a rate sufficient enough not to see any crop injury. So when you have more active herbicide in that soil water solution for longer durations of time, plant metabolism can't keep up with that, and that's when we see crop injury. So that's a common thing that we see in these cool, wet springs. A nice feature and kind of added insurance policy to some of our pre-emergence herbicides in grass crops, so things like corn, are an element called herbicide safeners. These protect from crop injury. What they do is actually boost those metabolizing enzymes within the plant, really ramp those up to help that plant really metabolize that herbicide as quickly as possible. These are in a number of our group 15 herbicides, things like metolachlor, so dual 2 magnum, acetochlor products have these in them already in the formulation. And then on the right-hand side of your screen is just a picture of a corn plant from a few years ago from one of our plots with some pretty typical group 15 symptomology. The plants kind of emerge, the leaves that are unfurled like that, they can't unfurl properly. And eventually they bounce out of this, but that's a pretty typical symptomology thing to experience. And once again, these are only in those grass crops, so not available for some of our broadleaves like in soybeans. And these are important things to consider when you're in these cool, wet springs. And then if we are cool during our post-emergence time, you want to make sure you allow that crop to have a few crop and weeds a few days afterwards to really get going and be growing appropriately once, because that crop metabolism needs to be going. And then weeds actually need to be growing too for that herbicide to do its job and be effective. So if the weeds aren't growing well enough, they're not either absorbing or metabolizing the herbicide into toxic compounds for them at a rate that's sufficient enough to get complete plant kill. So keep that in mind too if we end up having that turn once we're actually doing some post-herbicide applications. I also want to highlight, I'm going to highlight some resources today. So things that you guys can use throughout this season when we're thinking about post-herbicide applications. I know folks, because it's been wet, are really in a rush to get a lot of planting done. And in corn, there are some options that you can actually apply these pre-emergence herbicides a bit later in the growing season after crop emergence. You have much more flexibility in corn than you do have in some of our other rotational crops like soybeans. And table 1G of our weed control guide, and I'll highlight this more later, has a whole list of these herbicides and then the maximum corn growth stage that you can apply these. And just note, many of these herbicides actually only control weeds before they emerge, especially many of our grassy weed species. So keep that in mind when you are maybe applying these a bit later than anticipated. And then I just wanted to touch on dry weather. This is more pertinent to last year, but we'll see what Jeff says for our future weather. So for pre-emergence herbicides, we know that herbicide needs to be in that soil water solution for that germinating weed seed to take that up, imbibe that herbicide-laden water to do its job. So we see reduced efficacy when we're quite dry. And then on the post-emergence herbicide, similarly, when weeds or crops are drought stressed, the weeds are not controlled as well. So then I'm going to jump into today's goals, which was focusing on post-emergence herbicide strategies, and really touch on how I like to think about them both in our short range goals of managing weeds to ultimately protect that year's crop yield, and then also long-term weed control plans, which should really be focusing on depleting the weed seed bank, and we'll go over what that is and why that's important. So how do we avoid crop yield loss? You've heard this over and over again from Christy and myself. To start clean, so that's either burn down or tillage, full rates of pre-emergence herbicides. So I wanted to remind people of the March 21st virtual breakfast that Christy Sprague gave, talking about these strategies. So if you're still in this kind of phase and need a reminder, check that out. That's a great resource. And then today we're going to talk about post-emergence herbicides, and really timing is essential and sets you up for season-long success. So take a sip of your coffee and answer this question to yourself. So when should weeds be controlled to prevent corn yield loss or yield loss in corn? So when weeds are 2 inches tall, 4, 6, 9, 12. I'll give you a second to kind of ponder that. Maybe ask your neighbor if you're with somebody else, and then pick an answer. And I'll give you some data to support the range I think that it should occur. So this is some data that was collected across 34 site years in the Midwest, including in Michigan. And what they did is they applied herbicide when weeds were 2 inches tall, and they kept the plots weed free for the duration of the season, 4 inches, 6 inches, 9, or 12, and then looked at yield, and this is percent of weed free. So if we were able to apply a herbicide when the weeds are 2 inches tall, we maintained 100% of our yield potential compared to the weed free control. We waited till 4 inches, we lost about 3% yield, 6 inches, 6%, 9 inches, 9% yield loss, and then you can see how that goes down. So if we're focusing on 100% maintaining weed control or yield, we'd want to control those weeds when they were 2 inches tall. And usually our recommendation is 2 to 4 inches to preserve yield overall for the season. And we know weeds can go quite quickly. And many studies have found there's an average yield loss of about a bushel per acre per day. So you can think about delaying weed control and how much that might cost based off of how much you're ending up selling your crop. And we know weed control can be delayed from a number of factors that are completely outside of your own power to control. So big rain events, we're seeing these much more common occurrence. Also wind, it's been quite windy. Much more than the past 6-7 years I've been here that I remember in the spring. And these all keep us out from spraying. So hopefully you don't find yourself like this person on the bottom left-hand screen, completely sunk trying to spray their waterlogged corn crop. So when we're thinking about applying post-emergence herbicides, we want to keep weed control or weed growth rates in mind. Often weeds grow pretty slow at first, and then they have this rapid period of growth once enough heat units have been accumulated. You can think about how mare's tail grows on your field. So it starts as a rosette, this kind of circular grouping of leaves close to the soil surface. And then one day that stem just elongates, which is called bolting, and you have this rapid phase of growth. So if you don't hit this at the right time, you can see reduced control. Some of our aggressive pigweed species like water hemp or Palmer amaranth can grow an inch up to 2.5 inches a day for Palmer amaranth under really ideal conditions. So you can see how easily we can get out of that 2 to 4 inch target window. And then I want to highlight some ways that you can use the weed control guide to help you decide when to apply your post-emergence herbicide. This is on your screen, a picture of what the guide looks like. This year we changed, it went over a major overhaul. So I'm going to cover where you find some of this information in the new guide. So crop stage and growth height, which was just covered by Manny Singh a few weeks ago of how to do that. So you guys are all pros at doing that to your various field crops. So that often dictates when you can apply post-emergence and post-emergence herbicides. So table 1E for the corn section lists the minimum and maximum height that you can apply those herbicides. And one reason that we want to follow those cutoffs is for crop injury. So on your screen, this is a few years ago, I went to go visit a field in which the 2,4-D was applied when these plants were quite tall. The cutoff's about 8 inches. On the left-hand side, I'm circling right now, that's my boot. So you can see these plants are completely folded over on the ground. These were quite tall. This field was a little bit farther behind when this herbicide application was made. So not as much severe damage, but still these leaves were quite rolled. And then actually when they unrolled, they had big white streaks all over the field because those parts of the plant couldn't receive any sun to photosynthesize. So this is something to keep in mind if you do end up kind of staggering your plantings this year around those rains. You might have kind of a wide variety of crop growth stages. So some of these that have those hard cutoffs and not a lot of wiggle room, you want to make sure to check that before making that herbicide application. And then the crop height or stage does not take into consideration herbicides that have significant residual activity. So on page 12 of the, or table 12 of the weed control guide, we have the crop rotation restrictions. One of our greatest strengths here in Michigan is how diverse our crop rotations are. So it's a good idea to make sure those herbicides are applied within a window that you can plant next year's crop successfully without having to worry about any carryover issues. So keep that in mind when we're making some of those later post-emergence applications. Also, crop stage really fails to think about anything on the weed side. So we have weed emergence timing that can play such a large role. So weeds that emerge before the crop are the ones that are the most have the most negative impacts to crop yield overall. And then we have weeds that emerge later on. So if you're just doing a post-emergence app with something like a glyphosate or Roundup that has 0 residual, it's only going to control the weeds that have emerged and not any that have emerged after that. So timing that to peak weed emergence is also something to think about. And then we have weed height, which is what is really, what I showed earlier, has a large implication on yield, and that's due to various different durations of competition. So on table 1E or 2E, these are just in the corn and soybean sections of the weed control guide. We have a list of the common broadleaves and grasses here in Michigan, and then their maximum weed heights or leaf numbers that are listed on the herbicide label. And you can see any of these might be a bit taller. I've been talking about 2 to 4 inch weeds. So the very bottom of the screen, I just highlighted the glyphosate label. So probably not a great idea to be spraying 24-inch pigweed or 18-inch ragweed species. And why is that? That's because weeds compete for light, water, and nutrients. The longer that this occurs in your field, the more yield drop that we see. So keeping in mind, if you're just going by what the label says, I can control 18-inch common ragweed, yes, you can actually kill it, but a lot of that yield potential is already gone due to that competition. And then keep in mind predicted rainfall with post-emergence applications. Table 11 lists all the rain-free periods for our commonly used post-herbicides to ensure you're making that application and that predicted rainfall is far enough away so you're not just washing it off the weed leaves, that they have significant enough time to absorb that herbicide so it can control those plants. So that's the short-term goal. The long-range goal is really depleting the weed seed bank. The weed seed bank is just all the weed seeds that are in the soil in your field. These can contain thousands of weed seeds per square foot. There's a lot of ways weed seeds can get into the soil seed bank. Most commonly what we think about are weed escapes. So weeds that weren't controlled that year that went to seed, those seeds go into the seed bank. We also have old seeds that persist in the soil from previous years. This is one of the coolest aspects about weeds and why weeds are difficult to control. They're not like a crop. They don't all emerge at one time. If we could get weeds to emerge at one time, we could kill them all at one time and weed scientists wouldn't have a job. But weeds have what is dormancy and different viability. So they can persist in that seed bank for a really long time. And that's why they're so problematic. And then lots of external factors outside of your control, such as wind, water, animals, or birds, and then humans. And then we want to manage the weed seed bank in the opposite way than what would be recommended by any kind of financial planner. And that's to take as much money out of the bank, as much seeds out of the bank, and put as many or as minimal in. And I just wanted to give an example of how fast the weed seed bank can grow. So on the screen are just some common weeds that we have here in Michigan, how many seeds per plant they can produce. So I'll pick on Palmer and water hemp. So under extreme conditions, they can produce up to 1,000,000 plants or 1,000,000 seeds per plant. And then the longevity of the seeds not very long. And then horseweed up to 200,000 seeds, once again, only 4 years. So what I did was take a pretty basic model looking at if we had 99% control, which is really high, really great. And we started off with one water hemp or one horseweed plant. What would happen after 4 years of continuous 99% control? So as one water hemp or one horseweed plant produce either 1,000,000 or 200,000 seeds. So year 2, you have 250 or 50 horseweed plants. We can kill 99% of that because of that seed bank. In year 2, we have 31,000, 2,500. And then by the 4th year, we have 4,000,000 and 125,000 horseweed or meristone plant. And you might be thinking, these are huge numbers. Yes, they are. How do I actually visualize that? So I thought if I could take water hemp seeds and line them up in Spartan Stadium, how far would that actually go? So year 1, we'd be sacked at the goal line, pretty much stuck, not very far. Year 2, we have enough seeds to go about a foot. Year 3, you can pick your favorite running back from the past few years. We could line up water hemp seeds and make it 34 yards, which is pretty crazy. And then year 4, that a number of seeds, we could make it 42 times up and down Spartan Stadium with just our water hemp seeds that are in the seed bank. So this goes to show how fast those seeds can grow. And then I had a number of other scenarios to go over. I'm going to run out of time today. So I wanted to save the date for our weed tour. It's on June 26th this upcoming year. It's at the Plant Pathology Farm. We'll have more details to come. And then our website has all of the information that I just covered. So I will put some of these links in the chat while Jeff talks about the weather.
Now we're going to open it up for questions. Before we get completely started here, Christofonso had a message she wanted to share that I am putting in the chat about seed cord maggot in soy. So if you have any questions, feel free to enter them into the chat. Okay, first question. Jeff, thanks for the encouragement about upcoming evaporation. This spring, we seem to have some soil moisture that is more stubborn than usual. Seems like we should be able to get on more fields, but drying of soil at the 2 to 4 inch depth is very slow. Do you know if there is a climate explanation for this or just perception of frustrated growers?
Yeah, that's a pretty good seasonal question for Michigan. At least from the past experience, a great deal of this, I'm sure this is part of it, is the soil texture, which varies so much in Michigan, and what it provides, because the lighter, coarser textured soils we see respond quickly at this time, especially when there's drying like this and dry out, and while some of the really heavier, fine textured soils with lots of clay, they just seemingly take forever. And of course, there's everything in between. So it just depends on your setting. But we inevitably have this setup in Michigan every year. And unfortunately, as we saw on some of the maps here, we have had at least normal, if not even some areas above normal precipitation. So there are going to be these areas that they're just holdouts, despite what we want and need for them to happen. But it happens on a regular. So it is part of our climate. It's part of our physical setting that we deal with, and it's not an easy one, but it's one that we see on a repeated basis, unfortunately. So I guess back to the question, the good news is, or if there's just some positive news, these warm temperatures should help. Warmer temperatures both in the air and the soil make a huge difference in terms of how much evaporation can take place, and it should be, at least for the next few days, it should be above normal, and that even in areas that do pick up some rain here. And most areas will see at least a little bit of rain over the next 24 hours. But and then we've seen examples of this in the last week in areas that have gotten maybe 10 or 15 hundredths of an inch. It didn't take long to really get that soil back to where you wanted to have it again, or you just got there and it was ready to go and got that rain. But it should, hopefully things should dry pretty quickly here over the weekend until the next event might be a little bit different story. If it is indeed heavier, we'll have longer delays, maybe in some areas associated with that. But the pattern we're in, as we've said, is an active one, unfortunately, and that's not good timing for this time of the year.
Gotcha. Well, thanks for that. I'm hearing that today's the day to get your work done, and fingers crossed for the weekend. Okay, so from David, I think, Erin, this is for you. What are your thoughts and experience with some of the hybrid crop oils for post-weed control, especially in dry beans? For instance, dynamic and other crop oils. Do they actually help or hurt the crop more?
That's a great question. And I don't do work on dry beans, but Christy does. But in general, you always want to make sure that the adjuvant or crop oil or surfactant that you're using is approved on the label. So some labels are pretty explicit about what hurt or what adjuvants and things you can use with those. And in general, you know, crop oils are harder than our non-ionic surfactants and things like that. So I guess I would check the post herbicide that you're applying. And then I could pass this on for next week too, if Christy or has done any work directly looking at kind of some of these. But check the herbicide label is your most important thing, because I have used the wrong adjuvant and have burned corn leaves before. So you want to make sure that that's actually approved.
Great. So we have a question here about the weed field day. When is that scheduled? Maybe we could just put that up in the chat.
Yeah, I should have had that event already made through events management before this, but sorry. So it's June 26th, this upcoming year, and we'll have an article written shortly, and we can post about that in future virtual breakfasts. But put that date down. It's in the morning. We'd love to see you there. And then also Phil asked me to remind folks of the length of time before rain and herbicides to be for best control for pre-emergence herbicides. And we really want to get that rain event within 7 to 10 days. Half inch to an inch would be really nice to have get the residual that we would be looking for out of those.
So Erin, just to follow up on that, so if we have 10 days or 12 days or whatever it is, how much does that affect those herbicides on that post-emerge spray?
It's really herbicide dependent. So the herbicide, I don't want to get into too much chemistry, but different formulations interact with soil particles differently. So some get sorbed to that soil much tighter than others. But I mean, you really have to get pretty long, like last year, to start to see some big dips. So I would say if we don't get anything in the next 2 weeks, we could have another discussion. But it sounds like that's not going to happen. So yeah, not a hard and fast answer on that one.
Great. Before we get on to the next question, I know there are a few other specialists who want to make some announcements. Kim, did you want to share something?
Yes, I just wanted to give a quick alfalfa update. Anyone on the call who's growing alfalfa or other forages has probably noticed that things seem to be advancing a lot faster this year than normal, and that is true. We have been cutting alfalfa here on campus now. This week we were cutting small grains 10 days ago. According to the EnviroWeather alfalfa cutting model, we hit the threshold level of growing degree days for harvesting alfalfa into bunkers and piles today. We hit it down in Southwest Michigan yesterday, and that date is going to be coming up quickly as you go farther north. And what that means from a practical significance is that if you are cutting alfalfa in any situation where forage quality is important, such as on a dairy farm, you need to stop planting corn and start chopping your alfalfa, because you're going to be losing significant alfalfa quality now from now out for every day that you wait. We are getting a few reports of weevils from around the state, so that's another reason to get started chopping. At this point, you really don't have time to spray for weevils, and then wait for the withdrawal before you start chopping, you're better off just to chop a little bit early, even if you're not quite ready yet. Just get it off of there, because that will also help kill weevils.
Great, that is good to know. And Marty, did you want to come on? I know you put something in the chat early on about your survey, but if there are other updates as well you wanted to share.
Sure. Yeah, I just want to let you know that we are looking for a few wheat fields in Sanilac and Huron County for a wheat virus survey. So as to get a handle on what viruses are out there causing issues in wheat. So please, if you have fields in those counties, let us know via that link. Wheat, well, stripe rust in wheat. We don't have any confirmations in Michigan yet. So I think it'll be okay this year to wait until probably the flowering application timing to get control of the rusts, I guess, in general. And then head scab, we're showing low risk in Michigan at the moment, but states to the south are showing higher risk. I'm worried, like, as we move into flowering, that risk might increase with the forecasted rains and warmer temperatures. So that's something to watch. Yep.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other specialists on that would want to give an update? And we'll go back to questions. See none. We'll go back. So Ruth asks if there are any suggestions for controlling what appears to be glyphosate-resistant annual rye in corn about to be planted.
So that's a good question. And many people think we have glyphosate-resistant annual ryegrass, but annual ryegrass is a beast to control. It is one of our cover crops that's most difficult to terminate. So oftentimes that's why folks think that the glyphosate application hasn't done its job, but it's really difficult to control. So Monica put in a great fact sheet on termination, but in general, with annual ryegrass, you need to use pretty high rates of glyphosate. So you'd want to look at what rate that you actually use. AMS is essential. You need to have, would be like 17 pounds or 100 gallons of AMS. And then oftentimes we try to terminate it when it's too small. So in general, I think the recommendation is at least 8 inches up to just starting to flower. So it's important to get that terminated prior to your corn planting, and you can follow up with any of those questions. But in general, we do get a good amount of questions of terminating annual rye. It just has, it's just fairly aggressive and a little bit more difficult than some of our other cover crops to terminate.
Yeah, I do want to put in the chat, since it's still time to think about early season weed control. Christy gave a virtual breakfast not too long ago. So if you're still wanting to freshen up on that, you can check that video out. Okay, another question. Can non-treated corn seed affect weed control? They only spray Roundup.
And I guess if you could clarify, I mean, non-treated meaning that it's not treated for like insects. It doesn't have, I'm not 100% sure what that means, but in general, only using Roundup is not the best strategy. You can select for Roundup resistant weeds fairly quickly. It doesn't have any residual, so it's only going to control the weeds that are present and currently emerged. Unless you mean maybe non-GMO corn seed, which then yes, that would, you wouldn't be able to use Roundup. So I can answer my own question. But in general, I don't recommend just applying Roundup for your weed control program. You often will have a either select for resistance or have some escapes later on. So
I have a question real quick about if you have resistance in your area. You know, over on the west side, we're starting to see group 9 and group 5 resistance in Palmer amaranth. Is it worth just letting go this year at least, or should you confirm whether or not you have resistant weeds on your property?
that's a great question. And I would confirm that you have those. So we, the Plant Pest Diagnostic Clinic at MSU does formal herbicide resistance screening. So in the fall, you can collect those seeds and send them in. Dr. Erin Hill does a great job doing that, and you get a good report across a wide number of herbicides and sites of action. And then be really on the lookout for how those weed seeds move. So if you're near a field, or if there's some kind of equipment that's shared, or things like that, that's good ways to move resistant weed seeds around. So if it's in your area, keep that in mind.
I have a quick question for Jeff. So knowing that the Canadian wildfires are getting started and they're mainly on the West Coast now, is there something that we learned from last year's smoke? Did it affect yields at all? What should we look for if it ends up coming our way this year?
Yeah, and that's I think it's a good question. There is some new research, including a study that is being published almost as we speak here from Ohio State, that looked at this and impacts on corn. It's a mixed bag. That there are a mixed bag of impacts. I think some of them are negative, the direct toxology type of issues with the plant, but there also are some indirect positives. And what the study, and I hope to bring some of these results as soon as the paper is out here, hopefully soon. That one of the big changes was that the extra material in the atmosphere kept the maximum temperatures cooler than they would have been otherwise, and it changed the degree day accumulations relative to what they might have been otherwise. And ultimately, the authors concluded that this was a net positive for corn and maybe other field crops as well. And that was one of the major take homes from that. So it's a mixed bag. We looked here at MSU with EnviroWeather. We looked at solar radiation and found that, with the exception of a few days when the smoke concentrations were greatest or highest, we actually had above normal solar radiation, which is one of course the building blocks here of photosynthesis and crop production. So there's all sorts of things sort of competing with one another. But the bottom line is that maybe there might have been for some crops, maybe even a little bit of a net positive. There's also, relative to where we are now, the odds of having another year like last year, which was extraordinary, and some really, really bad air quality. Hopefully we won't see anything like that, but it's a reminder that the fire issue still is there and continues, and it could happen once again. Hopefully that it won't be as bad as it was last year. And remember too that we have to have the atmosphere set up in a way that would transport that smoke literally thousands of miles from its source into and that also takes doing as well. So but it's the problem, the overall underlying problem, unfortunately, is still there. So it's still a possibility, but hopefully we won't see anything like we did last year.
Great, thanks. And anyone who missed Kim's announcement can see her recommendations for alfalfa cutting and also the model. Okay, are there any other questions? Okay, another question came in. Do we know if we gained any amount of sulfur due to the smoke? Just a follow-up on that.
And that is that's a really good question in terms of the big picture. It depends, as usual. And we did some time looking into this. It depends on the fire and what was burning and how much sulfur was in the combustible material. And so some areas there actually was some, or it is possible to have some appreciable accumulation or deposition of sulfur. In many instances, though, it isn't, just because of what burned and having little sulfur in it. So it's certainly not a reliable. I think that's the bottom line message. While it might show up in some cases, it's certainly not something that's predictable and dependable as a source of sulfur. And to know, you would almost have to have the testing done if there was any, but typically that's not the case.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, I have one more question for Erin. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Bulletins Live 2. What is it? Just trying to get the word out here. And is it something to factor into an herbicide plan this year?
Yeah, that's a good question for those of you who have not heard of Bulletins Live 2. So on many of our herbicide labels, there is a requirement to check this website, which is called Bulletins Live 2. It's by the EPA and it's in accordance to the Endangered Species Act. You need to check this website with this particular herbicide that you're going to be applying within 6 months of that application date to see if there are any restrictions. And this is going to become more common with newer as herbicides get re-registered and things like that. But you have to look at whatever herbicide you're actually using. So the label on the jug that you purchased, you can put that number into this website, and then you put in your address and things like that to see if in your region there are any kind of special requirements that you need to be doing to ensure that you're not having any off-target movement of your herbicide to sensitive species for this Endangered Species Act requirement. It's been around for a bit, but it's getting a little bit more traction this year. And it is a federal requirement per your label. So make sure that you check those. This website that MSUE has put together is fairly straightforward. At the bottom of it lists a website that our Weed Science Society of America put together, explaining the details of why this is being implemented and the easy steps you can take to adhere to it. So it doesn't take that long. And it's something you definitely want to see what herbicides you're applying and put those in to make sure you don't have to do any kind of changes.
Great, that's good to know. Any last minute questions as we wrap up here? Well, thank you so much, Erin, for joining and speaking us today. And I'll put in the link for the Weed Science website where you can find so many resources. And that will be it for this morning's virtual breakfast. Have a great morning, everyone.